I was on duty in April of 1968 when Martin Luther King was assassinated here. Ironically, it was at the end of our spring vacation at MUS, and Mr. McQueen, Lee McQueen, and I had taken a group of primarily 8th graders for a trip to Washington, D.C. and Williamsburg. And if I remember correctly, but I may have the years wrong, we started with a 17-inch snow the night of our trip. And the bus made it through, and we got going and spent our week or so, close to 10 days, on that trip, and it was a great experience. And we had gone and had a great trip, as usual, touring both Williamsburg and the Capitol. But we were in Williamsburg, I remember, watching television, getting ready for our bus trip back to Memphis, when suddenly we were watching the news about the garbage strike in Memphis. And I thought, And then as we proceeded on, I heard that the National Guard had been called up in Memphis. And I thought, but I'm over here, how do I get back? So I was late returning. And as soon as I got back, which was like a day later, I'd had to get all my equipment and head down to the armory and stay for however long we were going to be on active duty. And that lasted into the next week. And then we were discharged on a Saturday afternoon, I believe. I think it was a Saturday that King was shot. I'm not certain of that. At any point, I had just come in with my duffel bag, exhausted, so glad to be back, and the news hit the television sets that he had been shot. So without unpacking or anything, I just loaded back up because I knew we were going to be on active duty again. And that was a really incredible and horrific time. That first night, because we had police radios going all night long, we heard reports of over 200 fires that had been set. And we were, of course, up all night and into the next several days. I think I was on duty for about 2 weeks and did ride out sometimes on patrols in some of those troop carriers, not an actual tank. And it was eerie initially, and then later when the, what do you call it when we're kept off the streets at night? Curfew. When the curfew was lifted, finally people came out, and we were still patrolling in the personnel carriers. And that was interesting because people thought it was sort of a lark at that point, many people in downtown Memphis. But during that first night, it was incredible listening to the planes flying overhead. We found out later that if it had not been for Governor Ellington and his friendship with Lyndon Johnson, Johnson would have called up the entire, I don't know what portion of the Army, but it was going to activate everything in the immediate vicinity. So it would have been national forces, not the state force of the National Guard at that point. So fortunately, we didn't have that, but we almost had complete destruction of Memphis that first night. And for a while, I couldn't understand why I kept hearing reports about low barbecue on such and such street, low barbecue on such and such street. And apparently, a lot of the low barbecue places were being bombed, destroyed, set on fire. I don't know what it means. Of course, I had not realized the connection between that Loeb and Henry Loeb, the mayor of Memphis at the time. But it was a very fiery night and scary, especially hearing all those planes going overhead. But we continued and stayed there doing what you do when you're in the Guard. And I never had any kind of personal encounter myself, except when we were down on Beale Street after the curfew had been lifted. There was one incident where a guy and a girl were having trouble, and so he was trying to leave her, and she hung onto the car, and he dragged her through the streets while she held onto the handle the car. That sort of was a return to normality, I guess, at that point. Now, that was the immediate experience.